Hello, hello. It's been a mad couple of weeks, but I am back. We'll see how I can keep up with things now that production is really ramping up for my show. I've been learning a lot, growing a lot. But what I wanted to talk about from now a couple weeks ago is the final season of the Umbrella Academy. I was really excited, scared for season 4. I'm not really a big superhero person, but I felt like the characters and the family dynamics were so strong and so engaging. And I did really enjoy the timey-wimey sci-fi elements too. I remember feeling at the end of season 3 that actually the Sparrow Academy wasn't that important, and almost everything but like the final couple of episodes of season 3 where they're resetting the universe and having to get by without their powers. And I'm like, truly anything could have happened before this. So that made me again a little bit concerned about how season 4 would go. And spoiler alert, unfortunately, I'm not wild about how season 4 ended. And it's definitely not helped along by the fact that it was so short, just 6 episodes. As I've been rolling this around in my head, I feel like where season 4 really dropped the ball was that they prioritized making sure that the plot happened with not a lot of regard for the characters. And in doing so, they hit some themes, but definitely not all. A core element of this show to me and what makes it so interesting is how each of these characters comes to understand family after being raised in a really emotionally neglectful environment. That's true of all 8 of our Hargrave Super Kids / Lila, that they are raised based solely on what they can do. Their only value is placed on what they can do for their parent. And so each of them copes with that in a different way, and that's what makes the show so engaging and interesting. Plus the apocalyptic stakes in there and the tragic irony that these people continue to cause the end of the universe that they're trying so desperately to prevent. The causing the end of the universe that you're trying so desperately to prevent theme was theming, but unfortunately I think by shortchanging the actual character arcs that these people have, and actual journeys and ways of coming into themselves that these characters had been set up on, we lose out on some of those other more maybe like emotionally resonant themes. And I think that's why this season didn't feel as satisfying as it could have. There are gonna be spoilers, but I'm gonna try and keep this fast, especially because my computer is getting full. So I'm not a CinemaSins girly, but the plot holes were so egregious that I have to talk about them because this doesn't make sense. And previously, things made enough sense for me to not squint at them and poke at them. The big plot things that they wanted to do led to dropping the ball with a lot of important details that never really got fully explained in a satisfying way. You know, of course it's timey-wimey, it's silly, but I felt like the internal logic of the first 3 seasons was really strong. Like I bought it as a person who is looking at it with like medium scrutiny. But this season, I felt like there were gaping plot holes that were super distracting. Some examples. What is Marigold? What is Durango? I know Abigail's a scientist and she's like, I made these particles. Okay, what does that mean? You're a scientist, but like, what was your goal in searching for or generating these particles? Is it just like a equal and opposite reaction? That just feels kind of vague. I feel like their explanation of time travel and like maintaining a single timeline was so much more satisfying in the first and second seasons. And just the way they dealt with the sci-fi logic here was so floptastic. Similarly, their new powers. When they got their powers back, that was very poorly explained. Like, I know their powers were different after they came back. The same but different and like maybe a little bit more powerful, but it sure would have been cool if we'd had a scene or two of them testing them out in a non-comedic way to understand. Because I'm like, how did Allison just become fully telepathic? Is this information on the cutting room floor somewhere, or did they just not write it? I really felt like very important things were missing this season, and I'm super confused about what was going on. It would have been nice to get like a clearer understanding of what everybody's powers actually were now. There weren't enough fight sequences to really understand what was going on there. I'm sure I'll think of some more details that fell through the cracks. But yeah, the Marigold Durango thing, I was like, what are we talking about? Like at that point, just, call it unobtainium. It's so vague. It just really bummed me out after the beautiful specific world building that we had gotten. Oh gosh, that's the other thing. It's like when they got their powers back, there was still a little bit of marigold left in the container. And then when Klaus threw out his shot, there was like that marigold that like hit that guy in the face, which is funny, but what does that mean? I guess when the cleanse comes and takes over, it doesn't really matter, but why wasn't that loop closed? Do you know what I mean? All of season 3 was about the Kugelblitz, the grandfather paradox. If you were never meant to be born, that destabilizes the universe. And that idea comes back this season where the existence of the umbrellas themselves destabilizes the universe. So at the very end, when they send off their families to the true timeline through the timey-wimey system, that should not be possible. Like if they send off their families and then they themselves elect to not exist anymore, it simply does not make sense that their families would be able to survive that. Maybe if it's like from the point of the reset, whatever has happened at the point of the reset is locked in, sure. But again, it was explained really poorly. And after having spent an entire season dealing with the implications of the grandfather paradox, it felt like a dropped ball in a major way. I needed some useful explanations to be able to accept that. I walked away like, this doesn't really make sense at all. The idea that the umbrellas themselves were the source of the destabilization in the universe is very interesting. It's been a couple of weeks, so I kind of sort of missed how they were able to direct the families to the correct location. Maybe that's it. It's like using the manual, they were able to find the true timeline or something. How would you know what the true timeline is? Viktor got the vision of the true timeline, but how would they know where it was? Oh my gosh. Okay. Explain it to me if you can. Yell at me if I missed that, but I really don't think I did. I just think that for whatever reason, these explanations were not included. And again, that's just something I have come to expect from the show. So what I want to do is go through character by character and think about why the season was not quite giving what it wanted to give. In spite of its overall plot being, I would say, fine, little disappointing, but I understand why they did it. I did read like a couple interviews and it did seem like the creators were a little self-congratulatory about the ending. And I'm like, it wasn't all that. And I think a lot of other people feel the same way. And like maybe if some of this character stuff had come through to make the ending feel really earned and really motivated, it would not have gone down so sour. So yeah, I'm gonna focus on our main 8 characters and some of the strays. Actually, I'll start with the strays. The Umbrella Academy formula is wackadoo, quirky superhero family, tries to prevent the end of the world, and is obstructed by quirky character actors. That's really what it is. And this season, Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally were our quirky character actors. They're wonderful. They're great. I enjoyed their weird little folksy murder people. I don't even know how to describe them, like hillbilly time people. I thought they were fun. I thought they did a great job with those roles, but in some ways I wasn't expecting as much from those characters. Those types of characters always feel a little bit disposable in the show anyway. So I'm so much more focused on the main 8. Our quirky character actors were quirky character actoring. I had fun with them. But talking about the main cast, right? We'll start with Luther, number 1. So Luther, as I read him, He is desperate for daddy's approval. Actually, Luther, I would say, is desperate for approval in general. He's been leveraging his physical strength and his monkey body to those ends. And at the end of season 3, he really seemed to really have gotten what he wanted in the form of his relationship with Sloane, who is never mentioned again in this season. Wild. Even though I'm pretty sure at the end of season 3, he was like, I'm gonna find her in this universe, which that didn't happen. But just to like not even speak about it, that is a major dropped ball. This is a character who held a torch for his adopted sister for like 30 years. So the idea that he would get over Sloane so quickly feels like a writing flop, you know? And in this season, he didn't really get up to much. We had some comedy bits with him. He and Diego had their little side quest in the FBI, but it really didn't have any bearing on the actual plot other than the reveal that the FBI had some amount of members of the Keepers and the idea that, oh, Luther thinks he's dumb, but then he's discovered this plot point. Okay, but that just doesn't feel like enough of a character arc for an entire season of a TV show. I think Diego definitely has more going on. My diagnosis of Diego is that he has fully bought into the superhero persona as we see in season 1. Something that I did think was structurally cool was at the beginning of season 1, we see all of our characters living their lives until we learn of Hargreaves' death. And then in this season, we get each of those moments as well, where we see the 8 of them in their mundane lives before this big destabilizing event happens. So Diego has like bought in hardcore to the superhero identity. So of course he's struggling to adapt without his powers, as he has, you know, the silliest possible job to show how far he has fallen, delivering packages and, you know, knocking out street lamps along the way. He is married to Lila. It's been a couple of years since the end of season 3, and they've been getting by without their powers. He has kids with Lila, and essentially his journey, and to another extent Lila's really, is learning to accept and embrace normalcy, their family. Everybody's trying to build an identity beyond be superhero, but Diego specifically felt so tied to his powers. He was the one vigilante in the group in season 1. He was the guy who was like, this is what I was born to do. And so his journey this season, I think, was slightly more satisfying. I wish he'd had more screen time. It was like Lila and Five, and to a lesser extent, Viktor and Ben were the main group this season. It just would have been cool to see a little bit more of Diego experiencing that. I didn't mind. I feel like putting Diego in the FBI arc was a little bit more satisfying. Diego did successfully complete his arc of learning to accept and embrace his mundane life, his domestic life, and focus on his relationship with Lila, even though his jealousy was jealousying. Rightfully so. Ew. But if only it had happened in a more meaningful way than just a goofy little side quest, right? Luther just felt like a hanger-on at that point, which is a bummer. It's like a disservice to both of them to, again, throw them into this little side quest that doesn't really mean anything or barely means anything. Allison really got the short end of the stick this season, and I know, like, the fandom has a lot of feelings about her. Lila goes through a lot of the similar things, and Diego goes through a lot of similar things this season, where it's like, of course, you've got your super family, but then as the only parent in the first 3 seasons, of course, Allison is prioritizing her child's well-being wherever possible. That is what parents should be doing. And I think Allison historically fancies herself a peacemaker. After the events of the other seasons, is more and more reticent to use her powers. So yeah, I would say Allison is dealing with the stakes of her own family, her literal child, versus the rest of the world. She's like literally in the trolley problem pretty much all the time, which is a pretty horrible situation to be in. And I would say this season, again, she's kind of on this weird little side quest where she, learns to be less protective of her daughter, learns to let go of her daughter a little bit more. And of course, by the end, yes, that's significant, but it just doesn't feel satisfying. And again, again, I feel like if we'd spent a little bit more time with Allison herself and not just Allison on her side quest to rescue Klaus, maybe this would have felt a little bit better, you know? I feel like she got there, but I'm gonna keep coming back to this idea of like, did it feel earned? For Allison, I feel like a lot of her journey was in the previous seasons. And so I feel like I do understand the character better this time, but again, just like not very satisfying, especially for like big plot reasons too. Okay, Klaus. I love this character. I love Robert Sheehan. To be clear, I love all these actors. I think they are all brilliant. This season, I think, would have been a total mess were it not for the strength of these performers and just like their level of commitment and understanding of who these people are, even when it's not anywhere in the text. The beautiful characters that they have crafted over these seasons really do shine through, and I wish they'd had a more satisfying ending. So Klaus is the one who is truly tortured by his powers. He has had a terrible time. His only solace was his relationship with Ben, but everything else was kind of a disaster. So even though, of course, he is extra neurotic in season 4, you understand why he is so reticent to get his powers back. And also why he is so insistent on abstinence from like any kind of substances. We stand a sober king. Again, something that would have been nice to see this season, and we got gestures at it in previous seasons where he trains and begins to understand his powers and actually make use of them and not just, you know, be completely overwhelmed by all of the ghosts that he sees and hears. And it would have been cool for that to have a satisfying ending this season, but essentially his arc was getting his powers back against his will, which is like a fascinating moral quandary for sure. So he gets his powers back against his will and quickly gets back into his tough and rough life. I don't know how to describe it. I'm such a dork. He gets back into his difficult life on these streets and ends up being coerced into sex work. Yikes, which is sort of played for laughs, which I don't love. And then buried alive by this gangster. So essentially he goes from happily not having powers to unwillingly having them, being exploited for them. And then finally in the end, he gets buried alive in this dog's grave. And somehow he talks to the dog's ghost and it barks, and that helps Allison find him, which like, okay, sure. But that just didn't feel like a satisfying journey of him coming to accept his powers. Again, it feels like a side plot. Like that's not enough of a story to carry a beloved and formerly incredibly well fleshed out character through to a final satisfying ending of a television show. Like Allison's journey of rescuing Klaus, their relationship this season was really lovely, even though like, they sure spent a lot of time apart. It would have been nice to see more of that relationship, but I'll take what I can get at this point. Her journey to rescue Klaus is great, but not super relevant. It was a cool and nice thing she did, but what was the actual bearing on the overall story? I think something that's so fun and interesting about the show throughout other seasons is the sense that like every action really matters and really contributes to the final outcome, especially season 1. I felt like the plotting of season 1 was so tight in that way. And so for this one to just have a lot of, I keep calling them side quests that kind of go nowhere, was a bummer, especially when they're not even that fun of side quests. You know what I mean? It's a bummer. It's a bummer. Like, okay, Allison confronts the drug dealer. She finds the grave. She hears the ghost dog barking and rescues Klaus with her daughter, alongside her daughter. It was nice to see her spend time with Claire too. That was really nice. But just like, to what end? Of course, I love Klaus and I'm glad that he is safe and healthy. But what was the point? The point was the timey-wimey stuff, and everything else that didn't fit into the timey-wimey stuff was so, I think, sorely underwritten and underconsidered. And so yeah, Klaus's arc could have been really interesting if he had somehow been able to like talk through his relationship to his powers, but that never happened. And it was a bummer. Even in the final confrontation, he flew once and that was it. And then basically had nothing to say or do until the tearful goodbye at the very end. It bums me out because he's such a good character. Robert Sheehan is such a wonderful actor, and like Klaus deserved better, just like everybody. Okay, let's see. Then we got 5. 5 has kind of always been the most powerful, not like powers powerful, but just like the most on top of it, the most plugged in, the most knowing what is going on at any given time. Timey-wimey powers will do that to you. So for 5's powers to change to the timeline navigation system, this is good and interesting to me because previously we were talking about the timeline, singular, and now we are dealing with multiple timelines. Okay, cool. I can dig that. 5 is one of the people with one of the most satisfying arcs this season in the sense that all the stuff he was doing actually had bearing on the plot. Wild how that works. The biggest misstep in 5's plot for me this season was the romance with Lila. I did not like that. That really bummed me out in a big way. I just feel like it just wasn't necessary. In season 1, he literally fell in love with a mannequin. So I do think there's something there where he does feel compelled to attach to something or someone. But the way it played out this season, I did not enjoy. It just felt a little bit icky seeing a character that you've been following since they were a literal child fall in love with a character that you've been seeing as a full-on adult this whole time. I don't want to really get into age gap discourse, but the way that this played out, given the introductions we'd had to these characters, did not sit right with me. Even though, again, the actors play it really well. In a different circumstance, I might have felt convinced by it, but it was not giving. That part was not giving what it needed to give. The question that it brought up of like, is 5 going to do the right thing and focus on saving the world or take refuge in this peaceful spot until the bitter end? That's an interesting question for sure. But I just think the romance didn't need to be there for that to still work and be interesting to me. And then I'll talk about that some more when I talk about Lila, who again is so great. Like all these actors are so good. I wish they'd had a more satisfying ending, all of them. So what else? 5 is the one who always pieces it all together and knows everything. This season, that remains consistent. I buy that for this character, even though, yeah, still a couple plot holes in the timey-wimey. The diner scene was fun. But I would say 5's story was the closest to a satisfying one, where he ultimately realizes what the right thing is to do and what the sacrifice is that needs to be made and makes it, which is, I guess, consistent in its way. He was doing what needed to be done to maintain the timeline. He was doing what needed to be done throughout the season with the knowledge that he had. And then in this one, for some month, he hid the knowledge that he had. But then when it really mattered, he stepped up and guided everyone else to that as well. So I feel like that is one of the, maybe the most satisfying character arc of the season. Talking about 6. 6 is Ben, sweet Ben. I am really bummed about Ben, that poor little character. He never stood a shot. And I mean, I guess in the grand scheme of the show, it was like Ben was never meant to exist. Like within the world of the show, Ben was never meant to exist. None of them were meant to exist. But then it feels like Ben was like extra never meant to exist. And it was a real bummer this time around because in season 1, we see him as a nice ghost. Same in season 2. Season 3, when we reset, Ben is resurrected as the Sparrow Academy version. And because of the events of season 3, we are stuck with Sparrow Academy Ben until the bitter end. And that just really bums me out. The idea that the true version of this character never gets to come out, especially given the events of this season. He falls in insta love / maybe it's magic. It makes as much sense as magic with Jennifer and then gets subsumed by their whatever cosmic attraction to each other. He becomes a plot device in this season and it just feels like a real disservice to the character that you never get to see him as he truly is, and you never really even get to see him make a decision of his own accord for the greater good. He doesn't actively intentionally get to participate in bringing about the new world, which is something that I think that the real Ben would have done and would have wanted to do. It's just really unsatisfying. And I do also think it was odd that when they had the opportunity to get powers back, it felt weird that he would want all of them to have their powers back. I understood why he would want them back, but I didn't understand why he would want everybody else to have them back. They gestured towards it, but I just, other than he's just like, we're supposed to have superpowers so we can save the world or whatever. But at that point, there was nothing to save it from. So, girl, I don't know. I really felt like Ben solely existed this season to make sure everybody get their powers back and fuse with Jen into a horrible monster that I could barely look at. The last like conscious decision he made was the powers back thing. And then everything else was kind of just him being along for the ride and then getting overtaken by powers beyond his control and never really getting to reconnect with his family, never really getting to have a satisfying ending. Like it's a bummer. And then lastly, Viktor, sweet, sweet Viktor, whom I adore. If I think about Viktor's arc, Viktor is the one who dealt with so much neglect. I mean, they were all abused, but like Viktor really bore the brunt of abuse from Reginald. And then over the course of the show, Viktor is the one who really stands up for the oppressed, right? And who, you know, when Harlan in season 2 is in danger, Viktor does whatever he can to help. Viktor is the one who like truly understands what it is like to be the apocalyptic force. And so he will do anything to reach a person in that state and bring them out of that, which is something so, so beautiful about this character. Hope and optimism and belief in the good in others is such a beautiful, beautiful quality. And in this season, I would say Viktor almost had a really satisfying arc. The time that Viktor spent with Reginald, I think, was super important, and I appreciated those scenes. And Elliot Page is, again, wonderful actor because everybody's a great actor in this. I feel like some of the writing was just not quite up to Elliot's acting skills. He gave a wonderful performance, but certain of those conversations just felt a little like going in circles, just not quite what I wanted out of those conversations. The execution wasn't quite there, but in general, I appreciated, you know, finally Viktor gets the opportunity to say his piece to a version of Reginald who is open to him. And I guess that's really true of everyone this season, but Viktor really gets the most face time with Reginald. And so that aspect of Viktor's character arc, I would say, was satisfying. But I was bummed out at the very end when Viktor, again, tries his best to stand in the gap and like reach the person who everybody else believes is beyond redemption. It just bummed me out that this time Viktor was not able to do what he needed to do. And maybe, I'm sorry, it's been a couple weeks ago, like correct me down below if I'm wrong, but Viktor like tried to remove the marigold from Ben, but it was, I can't remember if it was too late or if Reginald just pulled the trigger before Viktor wanted him to. But either way, I wanted a win for Viktor. I'm not saying that like a win was the only way for that character arc to be satisfying, but it just sucked that Viktor, sweet angel, person who would do anything to try and reach someone who everybody else believes is lost, the end was wrong and it didn't matter. It's really unsatisfying for that wonderful, wonderful character. Gosh, I love Lila. What a wonderful actor. Ritu Arya is fantastic. She was such an amazing addition to the cast in season 2 and feels like she's always been a part of this world. She rules. I think part of why she and Diego are so similar is she too can't really jive with mundane domestic life, and she's just more successful than Diego at finding a way out of it. So really, Diego and Lila are on pretty similar journeys throughout the season, but because we spend more time with Lila, it feels more satisfying. And I guess it makes sense that Lila and Five are the ones who were involved in the commission, so they've always been more plugged into what was going on at any given time. Lila was serving plot, driving the story forward. Lila is struggling to accept her mundane life. Again, love triangle, weird, bad vibes, did not enjoy. But even though she's come to accept her life with Five lost in the time stream, the second she has the opportunity to return to her family, she does it. And I thought that was really beautiful and very compelling. She also gets this powerful moment at the end of the season where it is sort of like an echo repetition of Allison's arc, where now that she has finally come to love and appreciate and accept her life with her family, seconds later she has to give them up and erase herself from existence. And she really struggles with that. Again, Ritu plays it beautifully. And then that final moment where she does decide to stay and sacrifice herself for the good of the universe was beautifully done and really well performed. So I would say Lila had a pretty solid arc this season, minus the side quest of falling in love with, I know he's not a literal child, but he feels like a literal child to me. The reason Hargreaves released the marigold was to prevent the apocalypse, and he inadvertently caused the apocalypse by doing so. I'll double check that and leave a comment or whatever. But so yeah, he releases it in an attempt to prevent the apocalypse, to start over after the creation of these substances destroyed their home world, which also, sidebar, would have been nice to get like a little bit more lore there. Like, what are you? You are a creature, but like, huh? What? So Reginald releases the marigold, creates all the super people, and then he attempts to train them, bring them together, to disastrous results in various ways throughout all of these universes, right? This version of Reginald, again, is like softer hearted than the others, more open-minded. It seems as though this version of him knew who they were. This version of Reginald seemed greatly changed, and I'm not mad at this character development going from, again, the arc. I would say Reginald starts out believing that he is unimpeachable, no decision he makes is incorrect, and finally realizes his own fallibility. But it's unclear where that change actually happened. He's so much more open to the umbrellas the second they walk into his house. Maybe it's Abigail's presence that like mellows him, humbles him. Again, I appreciate the idea that people can change, but it just wasn't executed that well. And then yeah, the experience of him with Viktor, the scenes of Viktor and Reginald were generally really lovely, really interesting. And I do think by the end, when he realizes that Abigail has been masterminding this whole thing, he really settles into his humility and recognition of his responsibility for the destruction. Although maybe he got off a little bit easy considering how horrible he was to everybody constantly. But yeah, so I would say that arc minus the opening of his heart, I would say that character felt handled okay. So Abigail, who was revealed to be the mastermind, although again, so badly explained. I've been Googling, like trying to understand what is going on here, and I just feel like there's not actually that much information. It's like, okay, Abigail is Reginald's wife, from home planet, scientist lady, created Marigold and Durango. At some point, Abigail realizes that Durango and Marigold being present in this world is what made the timelines unstable in the first place, and understands more than anybody what needs to happen now. But again, that's just plot. That's not character. She seems like a nice lady. Obviously, Reginald loved her. I just wish there had been a little bit more. I would have loved a little flashback of Miss Abigail to really understand who she was. Like, when she created these particles, what was her intention? What was she trying to do that led to all of this destruction? That would have been, I think, really helpful information to understand her motivations and why she feels so compelled to solve this problem by any means necessary. I wish I had a little bit more understanding of who this person was other than source of MacGuffin and like kind of nice mom when everybody needed it. Just plot device and that's it. It's a bummer. And last but not least, but also yes least, because this poor character was so horrifyingly underwritten, is Jennifer. I really felt awful. Like, Jennifer is only a plot device. She is 100% a plot device. Like, you could literally replace Jennifer with an object and the plot would not be changed. The only thing that would be different is like Ben wouldn't make out with her, but everything else would be identical. Like, they could have had a weird little town where the amulet is, and then like Ben has to break into the Jean's house to get the amulet. The amulet comes out of a squid, like, sure. And in the end, Ben becomes obsessed with the amulet and fuses with the amulet and turns into a monster. Like, Jennifer was truly just along for the ride, and it bummed me out in a huge way. Again, the actor did a wonderful job performing. That's not the problem. The problem is that the plot gave nothing nothing. At no point did Jennifer ever really understand what was going on or have the opportunity to make a decision. And I think that's really what it was. Throughout this show, you have been able to see the impact that each character has on the apocalyptic stakes and how their personal background and psychology impacts their actions, which then impacts these larger stakes. But very, very, very little of that was at play this season. And I think that's what made it so unsatisfying. Like, Jennifer solely existed to further the plot. Truly could have been an object. A human MacGuffin was Jennifer. And that is just a real bummer. And I feel like the show in previous seasons would not have written a character like that, you know? So that's how I feel about this season. And again, I remain confused about how their families are able to continue existing when they literally said they're erasing themselves from existence. What is going on? I remain pissed that Jennifer, like, okay, a girl appears in a squid. Please explain 1 to 2 more things. Where is her backstory? What does she want? What is she trying to do? Let her make one decision about what happens to her, please. It just felt like the team, the writers, whomever decided this is the story we have. Let's plug in these characters. Who cares what these people would do? Who cares where these people are coming from? Who cares whether they have a satisfying ending? We have to use all of these characters because they're all already in the show, but we'd rather not. So if we can shove somebody off in a corner, we'll do that. It was really frustrating to see a character-driven ensemble show fail to stick the landing. I will say some of the discourse has been very strong about the final thing, but I didn't mind the big thought that their existence was what was destabilizing the timeline and that sacrificing themselves was the only way to prevent the apocalypse. I just think that if the world building had been tighter, what would happen to their families. And if I felt like, oh, I got to see each of them finally complete their arc, change in the way that they needed to change from the very beginning, or find what was missing from their lives from the very beginning of the show, then I would have been, I think, more okay with this ending. And it would have felt like a complete circle, even if it is bittersweet. But as it was, I was just like, dang, I'm really, really left cold. So yeah, I might rewatch season 1, I might rewatch season 2, but season 4 for sure, and also season 3 were not giving what I wanted them to give. But I adore these characters, and I do think that a lot of things in this world were really well done and so fun and so interesting. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on this season below. As I'm filming this, I just passed 300 subscribers, which is very exciting. Again, it's been super busy. I haven't been here, so I appreciate y'all bearing with me. I have another video in the pike, a great interview with my buddy Nathaniel, who creates a web series called Hulkling and Wiccan, which is very exciting if you've heard about that, more superhero stuff. And then I also just watched Love is Blind UK, which was fascinating. So I think that's probably what I'm going to talk about next, those two things. Apparently I am on the Netflix beat. Who would have guessed? But yeah, I really appreciate you hanging out, and let me know your thoughts below. Did I miss something that would have explained everything and made everything so much more satisfying? Do you have even more plot holes to share? Let me know. I really appreciate you, and off I go to keep producing my show and, you know, overthink about my own plot stuff. It's not as bad on a pilot. Like, stuff doesn't have to make sense in a pilot. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, love you, appreciate you, excited to keep talking to you, and excited to share more about my production process as time goes on, even though it seems like y'all don't like those videos very much. Like, comment, subscribe for more, and I will be back as soon as I can. Love you. Bye.